Promise you, it's scheduling, would rather. Oh, thank you. This is why there's two Jamies. So we're gonna do, because this is a Council on Homelessness Committee, we are gonna do a quick roll call. And for council members, you're gonna start to see this slide in all of our council meetings. So just a reminder, with this new Brown Act change, we, for council members who are attending virtually, your reason for attending virtually needs to fall into one of these two buckets. And, so they either need to fall under just cause or emergency circumstances. If you are using a just cause virtual attendance, if you're using it for today, you're just going to need to tell us which of these four categories your reason falls into. And I am going to just go through roll call real quick. I don't think I saw Janae, but Janae, oh, wait. Okay, I'm going to wait a minute because she said a minute. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'm just going to hang out a minute because folks are now rolling in. Oh, because it's like 2:01. Sorry, I really jumped again.
You started at 1:59.
Apparently. Sorry, we're gonna wait a minute. I'm gonna back up. Just make sure we get everybody here. Okay. Can folks in the in online, can you hear it? There's like back, oh yeah, that's the mine. Sorry, there's like some noise outside the room. So you are here for the equity committee meeting. This is great. We have good attendance. I think we can now get started. So I was gonna say for council members, we're starting to tighten up now that we've had a couple months to work out some of the details. We're tightening up the use of the virtual attendance exemptions. So we're gonna start for all of our council meetings to remind folks, council members, what are the reasons that you can attend virtually? And then we actually need to start asking you which of these kinds of exemptions you're using. If you're using an emergency circumstance, then the body actually has to vote to approve using that. The bureaucracy is killing me. I apologize. I'm hopeful the legislation changes soon, but this is where we are right now. So for folks that are virtual, oh, I see a hand up. Hi, Jill, go ahead.
Hi, if somebody has a just cause, they just need to know that it falls within these categories, and that's the most they need to tell you is just cause.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Great. So what I'm going to do is go through, so Janae, I see that you're here online. Can you confirm if you are using just cause or emergency circumstances?
Just cause.
Thank you. Joe is here. Juno's here. Kiva, I see you online.
Just cause.
Thank you. Leslie is here. I don't know if I saw Pat. So Pat might be an absence until we hear otherwise, and Wayne is physically here in person. Awesome. Everybody else, you are welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, your anything, your pronouns, anything else you want us to know about you in terms of your affiliation. Just a reminder, we are here for the Council on Homelessness Equity Committee meeting. I'm really excited. I just looked, we have 17 participants here, which is fantastic. I want to, oh, we don't need to use that. Just a quick order of business. So there's minutes from the March meeting that were posted. Just see if there's any questions related to that. I haven't gotten any feedback. Okay. And then we're going to hold just a moment for public comment. If there's anything that anybody wants to say that is not already on the agenda, please feel free to speak now. Okay, we're done with that awkward time. I want to check in with the CEI team. So community education and information from health, housing, and homeless. Nope, from Contra Costa Health is here to do a presentation, and I know they have a time constraint, so I wanted to see if, do you guys want to go now and so that you make your time cut off, and then we can move things around in the agenda? I think that's Brittany and Carl.
Oh, hey there. Yes, I think that would be fine. I just wanted to mention, Jamie, just for a point of clarification,
Yeah.
we're entirely sure what you were after or what you were asking for us. So what we've done is we put together a short presentation with anticipating some questions afterwards that talk a little bit about what our office can do to assist with the communication effort, particularly on social media. Brittany is the social media manager for Contra Costa Health, which is the umbrella department that H3 belongs to, and I'm the coordinator in the CEI unit. And so we were approached a couple of weeks ago about helping out with accomplishing some of the objectives, and Britt has put together a few PowerPoint slides that we'd like to share and sort of talk to you about that will should help give you a sense of what we were thinking.
Perfect, and I realized, so normally this group would have sort of gotten the context for your presentation, so just very quickly, I'm just gonna recap that this committee is gonna be focusing over the next year on developing some new materials for community members that are experiencing homelessness, seeking services, and or what we're calling amplifiers. So folks that may be working with people, encountering people that need to access services. And we want to make sure that our materials are accessible, have the information that people need, are cueing people that we're talking to them, all of that stuff. So that's the context for this presentation that we're going to get from the county health services communications team that will be providing support for us sort of in the same way that we're staffed to this council. They're also sort of staffed to us to help support with some of the development. So that's the context. So go ahead.
Are you ready, Britt?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Yeah, I'm going to give you, you have the ability to share?
I think so. I'm just going to make sure I'm sharing the right stuff. Okay, I'm hoping you see a PowerPoint.
Yep. And we see it in the not slideshow mode.
Okay.
We can get access to these slides.
Yeah, so we'll have these slides later.
Yes. Okay, great. So, hi, my name is Brittany Goldman. As Carl mentioned, I am a community media relations specialist, and I manage a lot of our digital communications, including social media, here at Contra Costa Health. So thank you so much for making the time today to hear about social media and to invite us here. This is in my notes as I click. So, So here are the social media channels where you can find us. The platforms that we currently use at Contra Costa Health are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And social media is a really important tool for Contra Costa Health. It connects us to our communities. It helps us be informative and educational, and it helps promote our brand and services. So we really want our community to recognize and trust Contra Costa Health and know about our services and how to access them. So the best uses for each of the platforms are a little different depending on which kind of social media channel that you want to use. So Facebook is really best for brand awareness and advertising. We use Facebook to organically share news, information, updates, resources, to talk to, engage with our community, kind of everything we do, we kind of like to share on Facebook because we really do have a broad audience on there. But paid advertising is really where Facebook shines. It allows you to hyper target the audiences that you care most about. So for example, during COVID, when we were doing vaccination clinics at schools, we used paid advertising to target parents and people who lived in those specific communities rather than just posting on a page, so that people who would benefit from that information were more likely to see it. So we know we have a lot of community members who follow us on Facebook, but we have a lot of city partners, chambers of commerce, nonprofits, and other community-based organizations. Twitter is best used to spread news really fast. It's highly skimmable content that's being updated by the second. I think it's like 6,000 tweets are tweeted out per second. So it's a lot of information going out at once. So we use Twitter to share news and information, provide updates, resources, kind of similar to Facebook, but we do it in a different way. And so again, we do have a good understanding of who our audiences are on Twitter. We know our media partners follow us there, other county departments, our supervisors, elected officials, nonprofits, and then we also have some other health departments who follow us as well. So Instagram is owned by Facebook, but a little different in terms of audiences and purposes, and audiences are just a little bit younger on there. So we started the CCH Instagram in September of 2020. We haven't had it that long, but we've had nice organic growth, and we've slowly built our following. I think most of that is probably due to COVID, since there's been a big spotlight on our social media during the past couple of years. But right now it's important that we still engage our communities and keep people interested in our work. So Instagram is mostly a video sharing platform. Interesting visuals are really important. It also has deep engagement, which means that you can expect more interaction from your audience. So likes, comments, shares, saves, things like that. And so our audience on Instagram are a lot of community partners, media partners, county departments, county supervisors, and a lot of businesses. LinkedIn, we are just starting to use and post on, but it's really used to build brand awareness, make connections, share ideas, and foster partnerships. So we use it to share our expertise, post about jobs, news, and then sometimes some accomplishments. And it's really peer-to-peer, business to business. So our followers are more staff, potential employees, and people in similar fields. Now, I talk about this just because understanding who your audience is on each platform is important, because it helps you segment your strategy and your information by who you're trying to reach and who you're trying to talk to. So that brings us to creating a social media strategy, which is really just kind of your master plan for how you create, post, and engage with your social media content. So here are some of my top tips, and I say tips just because the right strategy is really just one that gets your content noticed, and it should be and can be constantly evolving. So first, as I discussed, is it's important to define your audience and determine who those people are so you can create content that appropriately meets their needs. Think about who you're trying to reach and why, and sometimes it helps to think about demographics like location, age, gender, occupation, things like that. Then you'll want to determine which platforms you'll want to use. And again, there's kind of no right answer for this. It's about meeting the needs of your target audience and knowing where they're spending their time online. So again, that's why I included a bit about who follows us. Like, for example, we know our media partners really mostly follow us on Twitter more than any other platform. So if we send out a press release, we'll often go ahead and tweet the link out on Twitter, because we know that's where the audience who needs that information is and is looking for that information and spending their time. Next up is creating content. So obviously you want to create unique and engaging content that gives people a reason to stop scrolling. That's why previous steps are important, because when you know your audience and you know what they want and need, you can create content that engages those interests. Lastly, but really important, is setting goals and measuring results. There are so many things that you can track on social media channels, and as you kind of move through the process, that can help you determine what some of those things should be. But it's important to set those metrics and determine your KPIs, which are your key performance indicators, so you can get an idea of how your posts are performing, and then kind of keep a scorecard to measure your progress. And then I didn't put this on there, but it's really important to adjust your tactics. When you are kind of looking at your progress and your scorecard, don't be afraid to change things up. Social media doesn't just kind of start working overnight. So I really encourage you to experiment, find the right combination of channels, content, and messaging that's working for the audiences that you want to reach. So best practices and what works for us. kind of go hand in hand, but are also a little different. So I want to start by saying that social media is extremely fluid, and the best content strategy, like I mentioned, is one that is constantly changing and improving as you learn more about your social channels and the people you want to reach. But that being said, everyone knows that great content yields great results. And so posting similar content across all of your channels ensures that your followers are seeing the content that you want them to see, regardless of which channel they like to spend most of their time on. It's important to schedule posts at the right time, usually when most people are online and active. And images always go a lot further than text on graphics. On average, posts with images gain more clicks, reach, views than text-only posts or posts with a lot of text on the graphics. It's also important to engage your audiences, and that can mean a couple of different things: asking questions, posting interesting comment, or just replying to comments and messages that you receive. And then it's always important to relate your content back to your goals. You shouldn't be posting just for the sake of posting. There should kind of be a rhyme and reason behind it. And so CCH does all of that for the most part. We use a lot of photos, videos, and graphics on almost every single post across all of our social platforms. In post copy, which is like the text that you see that goes along with the image that you're seeing on social media, we try to use conversational, accessible, easy to understand language, not a lot of acronyms, if at all. And then we almost always like to have a call to action. So when I'm writing that copy, I try to think, what do I want people to do when they see this? Is it comment, find resources on our website, just be informed, and then kind of let people know what those next steps are. So we told you, we told you about this thing, so go read more about it on our website, or we want you to sign up for this event, so here's how you go ahead and do that. And we typically post about 1 to 2 times per day. That's about the max that we'll do it before you start seeing engagement dip on your posts. It kind of oversaturates the algorithm, and the algorithm is like, whoa, slow down, you're doing too much here. But the exception is Twitter. You can tweet your little heart out and you don't see much dip in engagement for that. And then timing of posts, we use Hootsuite at Contra Costa Health. It's a content management platform, and it does the guesswork for us, which is really nice. It is a paid subscription though, but it gives suggestions on best times to post, how previous content has performed on specific days and times, and then it does tell you when your audiences are online and most active. So kind of checking those best practice boxes for you. And so I know that this is a lot of information on social media and maybe can feel overwhelming at times, but that's why CEI is here to help. We can help with everything that I just discussed, figuring out what some of those KPIs are, what some of those metrics that you should be tracking. We can pull analytics for you. We can help create graphics, recommend a budget if you want to do paid social, write your social copy, all of that stuff. So I will stop blabbering. Thank you all for your time, and see if you have any questions. Carl is here as well, who can answer questions if they're outside of social media and just more about communications.
And I just wanted to interject before we got in there. We wanted to provide you with this presentation about social media for a couple of reasons here. One is that just about every communications campaign that we do these days is going to significantly involve a social media component. So it's just good information to have. The other reason is it's just about everything that Brittany mentioned in her presentation is more broadly applicable to communications planning in general. And so these are principles that apply across the board, regardless of which strategy or which tactics within a strategy you're going to use to try and reach your target audiences. So we thought that would be a good place to start in talking to the group about what you hope to accomplish. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you both. It's a great question. I think we can take questions from the group. I will say we're kind of at the beginning of our process. So we've done, there's 2 surveys that we've done. One with what we're calling amplifiers, who are more like providers or people working with folks experiencing homelessness. And then a whole second survey for people with lived experience to basically identify, like, what do you want to know? Or what do you already know? What do you want to know? How do you want to get that information? And then we're building this big list of what we're calling amplifiers, which are sort of all those channels. So I don't know that we have the answers for that exactly right now, but we are gathering that information and definitely will be able to pull that for you guys in a pretty package. And we're gonna actually present some of that in a little bit about what we've got so far.
Sorry to jump out of order, JB.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's good. It's okay. Yeah, Juno.
I guess I have a comment. Excuse me. I can definitely see where, you know, a lot of this stuff lands for me, and especially for the group that I work with, YAC, and kind of thinking about connecting with our target audience, which is young people experiencing homelessness, or young people in program who are, you know, attempting to find housing or find stable income. And a lot of what you said definitely in the presentation definitely seems like it could be applicable to something along the lines of what we want to do here at the Equity Committee as well. Mainly after we have these lists, having a way in order to organize and like contact loosely without direct contact that like the email chain would have. You know, because I agree, the text chains are less engaging than having something that has an image attached to it, or even is like readable in the character limit of a tweet. And just having that sort of loose contact to continue to kind of like be like, okay, there's this event going on here. Next week, is there anybody who can like coordinate or wants to coordinate? So like ideally, I feel like using social media is like our target audience would be the amplifiers, and like we would want to have them, we would want to have them as our target audience with our, you know, kind of sort of message being, this is how we all stay engaged, I guess. Because we have this list of like wonderful amplifiers, but it seems that it would be really tough to be able to like manage all these names and all these organizations in a way that engages them, while also like not just getting lost in the string of email chains that go out. So I definitely think, and you know, another thought I had is these kind of was mentioned in the presentation, these kind of things like it can take a little time to gear up, and like they take like, you know, a lull in a retention doesn't necessarily mean it's a failure. It just means like, you know, we need to rethink the process. So I think that being said, you find like a sweet spot there, using the analytical tools, you know, testing out different means of spreading out information. I think that like, not only for like Yak's purposes, I'm just kind of fantasizing about that a bit, but also for the way that we have this whole group of contacts to manage, I think that could be really beneficial for us. So.
Thanks, Juno. Jamie Schechter.
Thank you, Carl and Brittany. That was super informative. I have a question. Just, you know, Contra Costa Health has those 4 main platforms that we use, and I'm just curious. There's thousands of social media channels out there. How much time and capacity does each kind of take, and how do we kind of right size the efforts we're launching?
It's a great question, and Britt actually has good answers. So.
Yeah, I think that I don't know that I have an exact hour number of how much time it would take to set up a social channel, set up a strategy behind it. I will say the reason we've stuck to the 4 social channels that we have and haven't added on other popular channels like TikTok or Lemonade is starting to get popular too, is that we don't have the time and capacity to dedicate to creating content for those channels, managing them, and creating a strategy behind them. And so it is pretty time consuming. I started my job in 2021 and was hired specifically because it could potentially be a full-time job. It's a lot of work, and you can spend as much time as you'd like to on it, is kind of my short answer. I know that doesn't really clarify things, but it could be as big as you'd want it to be.
But let me call out 2 things. You know, one of them is that one of the nice things about social media and almost exclusively and particularly social media for us is that everything's measurable, and so you can see how you did, and that can inform what you do next. And so because it's backed by analytics, you can tell who's looking at your posts, and you'd be surprised at how much demographic information you can learn from the way the posts behave. The other part too is that we are curating these main platforms and investing lots of work and energy in maintaining them to make sure that that we have followers and that we're engaging with them, more importantly, but we also are flexible in our tactics, and a lot of this really does depend on the audience and the key messages that we're trying to deliver. Like just an example, last summer during the MPX epidemic, we were buying paid advertisements on the Grindr app to reach a particular audience that needed some specific information about vaccination at that time. And so we can explore different kinds of tactics if we have a sense that they're going to be effective at reaching a particular group that we're trying to reach.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carl.
Absolutely, part about the social media is all in fact all those things. So they wonderful tools.
Leslie, your hand up.
Yeah, what should we know, please, about the process and time frame for something to be approved, to be pushed out on social media?
Well, I think a lot of that's collaborative, right? I mean, and so we anticipate working with you and it's sort of a two-way dialogue. For Contra Costa Health, the communications officer, needs to okay everything we publish, but with social media, it can be fluid, and often it's the same day. And so what we'll often find is, like, if you come to us with the idea rather than like the finished product, say, here it is, it's ready, and hand it to us. It might be more along the lines of saying, here's what we wanted to say, or here's what we're hoping to do, and then us working together to make sure that it meets the department's the communication standards, and so we really help to streamline that process. It's part of our staff's role.
Thank you.
That goes perfect into what I was going to ask. So Joe Bruner here, I was wondering, I have quite a few little things that I want to touch upon. So you said that that gets posts like 1 or 2 times a day, and I'm kind of curious on what content is posted. Is that like data, resources, links, like it was mentioned, press releases are posted? I'm just kind of interested, that's my first question, it's just like a little snapshot of what you post or what's posted on social media.
Yeah, we post all of that stuff, from press releases to resources to information. During the storms over the winter, we shared information about CORE and how people can get those resources. We shared information about, if you lose your power, here's how to make sure that your food doesn't go bad. So it really varies. And while we have kind of a set schedule of different things that we want to post, what's going on really informs what we do post. And so I'm happy to throw that schedule out the window if something like a storm pops up, and that's the most important information that our community needs. So we also post photos of our staff, of people that we serve, to kind of add in a storytelling element as well. So it really varies. We post a lot of different content.
And so, like I said, I have a couple of questions. The engagement, your post engagement factor, is that actual people experiencing homelessness, or is that the people serving the people who are experiencing homelessness? Like, who's getting that? Do you know? Is it that, because you were saying that a lot of the followers or organizations and city representatives, and like, do we know if that content gets to the actual people experiencing homelessness?
Right. I think that would be a limitation of social media, that's not demographic information that Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter would necessarily share with us. And so while you could do paid social media to say we want to reach people who we know are in this neighborhood or this area or this zip code. And it's more likely that the people in that location will see the information that you want them to see. There's really no guarantee. The algorithm does kind of help connect the dots, where I have been interacting with a lot of pages that talk about homeless services. And so maybe Facebook will be like, well, she'll probably like this ad, but there's no way that we can tell it to do that.
And I have two more, and they're really simple. One is where you get your graphics. So, and I like the fact that what you were saying, Leslie, about the timeline factor, because I like that we can just bring me the idea, like we want to see this kind of photo with this terminology, these colors. And so I'm wondering, like, where do you actually get your graphics from?
We have graphic designers on staff who can help bring your vision to life. Which we
those are
would
the parts
send
that I
back
want,
to you, and
I want to do it out with them.
yeah, we would send that back to you for approval, show you what it looks like before we just go ahead and post it. It's not like you give us an idea and we run with it. Like Carl mentioned, it would be very collaborative.
And I want to mention too, it's organized too. So you wouldn't say, I feel like making a post today, and then I'm going to dial up Brittany. It'd be more like, we're going to have a meeting at the first Tuesday of every month where we talk about what we're working on this month, and then like you'll figure out how many posts we're going to do and what the messages are, and then we'll plan them. So like, we'll be planning what comes out in the last week of April and the first week of April.
Yeah,
For the most part, unless there's a time-sensitive emergency or something. So,
Yeah. And then, like I said, we throw the schedule out the window.
So this is Jamie Jeanette. I have another question, and maybe this is too in the weeds, but I'm thinking a lot about like a campaign and branding, and I know Health Services clearly is doing some rebranding, and I'm thinking about like as part of what we would come to you with. We've gotten a lot of feedback from in these surveys about like the kinds of information. I think we can pull together some basic messaging. And then there's like ideas around colors, but I'm imagining we'll work with you also around the branding stuff. And it gets a little tricky because like the work that we're doing is like staffed by Health Services, but is not actually like Health Services. So I guess we'll just figure that out. Right now our colors are like teal and purple, and we probably want to stay with like some
repetition.
Yeah, like my idea is like, we want people to see this and go like, oh yes, that's homeless services, that's all connected. Because I think the experience right now is things look really different depending on who they're coming from in our system. And so I'm excited for that. And I feel like our next big chunk of work, and we're gonna talk about this in a little bit, is pulling together some of those things that you all will need around like, what are the key messages? What are our goals? And then there's like a whole second parcel, I think, of developing more detailed, not just like the flyer for, the call to action is really like call, care, or core, right? Like this is how you connect with services, but then there's this whole other chunk of information that I think we'll definitely want your guidance about which stuff is best addressed in a frequently asked questions document, which one would lend itself to short videos, like how do we communicate, and again, like who the audience is, because I do think we have kind of two key audiences. So I'm excited to work more with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, like I always look. We always make communication plans, right? To that are sort of functional documents that help us to figure out all the different stuff we're doing and why. And so we're sort of up at they always look like this like a ever branching flow chart, and we're sort of up at the top of the tree right now. And we're like the first thing we've got to do is we've got to identify who the key audiences are and what the key messages are for each one of those audiences. From there we'll get into strategies and then tactics within strategies. And like you were mentioning earlier, you want everything to sort of look the same. That's part of why we do a communications plan, because it allows us to on one document to kind of assess like, here's all 5 of the different say printed pieces that we have to make for different purposes. We can more efficiently use our resources. Like if we're having the same graphic designer working on it, they know instinctively, like these all go with the same campaign. And so they all need to have a same look. So they look like they're associated. That's part of what makes it a communications campaign, right? And how you could tell it is one. And so that's naturally part of our planning process. And that'll span beyond on social media, like you're going to find that, probably, some of your key audiences aren't just don't happen to be perusing CCH's Instagram account, and there might be some other more effective ways of reaching them. And so I think it's really neat that you guys are doing a survey to get a sense, for example, how to reach people who are experiencing homelessness right now, and getting people with lived experiences, their thoughts about what's most effective. It's all useful information, and it really will help to inform some of the tactics we might try to get a call to action or a key message into that audience.
And to Carl's point, if there's another organization that works with the populations you're trying to reach, and they want to post the graphics that we help create for you, we're more than happy to share those with you, so you can pass them on to whoever wants to post them.
And this is Jamie F. again. I'm curious, so to tie it back to this group, we're the equity committee, and the focus on amplifying our message is to really meet those marginalized communities that we haven't done such a great job of reaching in the past. So I'm curious if you all have any kind of expertise or can point us in a direction on research or best practices in reaching kind of more targeted communities versus like the blanket messaging that we can do.
Right. If we don't have it on staff, we have access to it through the health department. We have an equity team here associated with health services leadership who specializes in that. We have specific programs that do community outreach, both geographically and to marginalized communities, who we work with very closely to help us figure out what the right way of delivering messages are, even if the messages are culturally appropriate or linguistically appropriate. And so, I would really encourage this group to also engage our partners in equity and with the ambassadors programs because they are really good at their jobs, and I think that they can carry that ball further than we can with a lot of communities that you hope to reach.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer.
I have a question. This is Juno Hedrick. I think Brittany mentioned earlier about how the Facebook, Twitter, most social media platforms wouldn't really have a way for us to track directly if people who are experiencing homelessness were engaging with those posts, and more along the lines of we could target certain locations and areas. I was actually curious, like kind of expanding on that, about what the best practices and county standards are for kind of extracting that demographic information and how much that can be used. Because I imagine in a certain case, like just as an example, if we wanted to see or receive information about if people with experience, if people experiencing homelessness were engaging with our posts, we could, for example, like create a poll directly in one of those posts, or we do at the beginning of most of our Council on Homelessness meetings, we do like a who's in the room type of icebreaker exercise, but I can see that applied in a similar way in like a consistent social media post, not like, daily or hourly or anything like that, but like something that could track the changes and responses over time. But I don't know how much that information is applicable according to county standards, or if you can extract that kind of demographic information for posts. So that's best practices or not. So my question is,
extracting that kind of information from a post, that's not information that would be readily available on the back end of typical analytics that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram provides. We could do something, and I would have to double check with our communications officer and make sure just kind of what we're allowed to do kind of thing. But we could do stuff like a poll at the beginning of the campaign that is in our stories, and we post it X amount of times per week. Stories stay live for about 24 hours, so we could post it maybe once a week for X amount of time. We could figure out the cadence of that and kind of get a sense, maybe do it again throughout the campaign and just see how that answer changes throughout.
that's exactly
Another
what
thing we could do is post. post like a survey, a link to it, and then you guys would be able to get that information so you can get a sense of what those populations look like. But unfortunately, we just don't have that information available to us, that level of detail.
That's exactly what I had in mind, I guess, with the kind of what you said about the polls, and like, I was I guess, like, I was expanding on that, because I was like, well, I know we don't have access to that information, we could ask, but then how much is that information we receive then from asking? Because technically anybody could answer, right, in any way they
Right.
choose. So like, how much is that by like best practices or by county standards? How much is that information actually hold weight, I guess, if we were to like take that
No,
information?
I'm not sure if we've ever taken data like that before and used it in a really intelligent way. And I'm not sure how accurate we could be polling at different times. It would kind of just be luck of the draw of who saw it, who responded, and who wanted to engage. One other thing we could do though is create trackable links to our resources and see if that, like, see how many people click on it. We can see where the people who engaged with that post are within the county, and if that tracks with people that you know are experiencing homelessness that you want to reach. There are different ways that we could do it that isn't maybe necessarily like a self-identifying type of thing, but a way that we can pull some data that could be useful. We'd have to analyze it a little bit.
Thank you, that answers my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think really analytics from social media is more of a blunt instrument than a surgical tool.
Yeah.
But often we don't need it to be anything more to help inform, like, you know, whether more is needed here or something different is needed there. And so so there's still a lot of use in it. Yeah.
And that's great. That was actually one of my questions too, because I think one of the things that we're gonna need to build is like a very thoughtful landing page, like for all of these clicks, or if we have a QR code, like we need to have a hub that again, like has our very clear call to actions. And I wanted to make sure that we would be able to track how people got there. And I wasn't sure what level of detail we'd be able to, like how.
Yeah. And we can create different links per platform so we can see which one is performing better against the other.
Great. So Wayne and then Joe.
And I would suggest creating the jumping point, the central places where we're creating information. We would want to create very low bandwidth in data because of the nature of people that are in encampments and on the streets have very low to no data at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we wouldn't want to waste all of that.
We could be about as low-fi as it gets around here in the health department. Our specialty. So
you brought up what I was gonna mention this earlier, but I didn't because it didn't fit in the conversation, but it does now, because I was thinking blogging. Blogging would be a really interesting way to get that platform, to use it, like, because I was wondering, I know they don't have it, but what does CEI stand for? What does that stand for?
Community, education, and information.
Oh, okay.
we love a good acronym.
That's what it is. Okay, so then, okay. Because what I was thinking was like, so like the CCH website doesn't have like blogging, they don't blog, but they have other platforms. And I was wondering if it was attached to their main website. Because if it was, then we could create a blog that would be specifically platform for what we were just talking about. But it was just a thought process.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, the you know, H3's website is you know, Contra Costa cchealth.org is an umbrella in which H3's website lives, and so we have good flexibility to place kind of the web-based landing spot / receptacle of information for the communication campaign on CC. It'll be cchealth.org / something, you know, like whatever pithy thing we decide to call it, and you know, and so it'll be as simple as that for whoever is trying to access it or find it, or as simple as a QR code, you know, potentially. But does that answer your question, or did I miss
Yep,
the?
no, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yep.
So I want to check in about next steps. So we are gonna talk about some information today, and then we have a materials development working group that's actually gonna be kind of pulling together the stuff from the surveys around like drafting some messages, pulling together some ideas around images and all that stuff. And I'm just trying to figure out the best way for us as an entity to work with your team. What do you need to be able to like take things to the next step and start building tracks?
Well, what I would love, like, is for, like, say, our next substantial conversation would be, if the group doing that work could tell us, help us to identify what do you think the audiences are, like, what are the specific audiences are for our communication campaign, and for each one of those audiences, what are like the 3, 4, maybe 5 at the most important, like 25 words or less messages that you want each of those groups to receive in some fashion through the campaign we're going to develop. And then the only other thing I'd say is don't get too far ahead. Like, don't worry about what color it is or what kind of snazzy tactic you were thinking about in the shower, because we're not there yet. I mean, keep that information. We'll talk about it later. But like right now, we want to talk about like really kind of like we're still high off the ground. And so when you bring that to us, that's what's going to enable us to start having, more specific conversations about like, well, how do you give a call to action to, a CBO to do a thing? Or how do you get a message to somebody who is experiencing homelessness now? What's the most effective way to give them a particular resource? That's when it starts looking like something like, what we'll do is we'll have a specific web page or a specific printed material, or we'll hire a skywriter and a biplane will fly over Concord. And like, I mean, like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Maybe not that one, but that's what I mean is it'll come out of the ether, and suddenly we'll start be talking about concrete things that we're really going to do. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for CEI, for Carl or Brittany? Like, I think we will definitely be in more touch, and we may have you back to talk to this whole group at some point, but we will be in touch to work more closely together.
No problem. We really appreciate you moving us up on the agenda too, just to make everything fit today. So you helped us get through an afternoon.
Excellent. Well, and I actually am going to move the agenda a little bit more. So Elaine is here from an adult literacy program through the libraries, and I asked her to come. I saw something on one of the supervisors' websites, and I thought, one of the populations that we know folks are working with are people with low to no literacy. So hoping Elaine can help us think through some of the best practices and ways to really reach and have that population in mind as we're developing our materials. And so Brittany and Carl, you're welcome to stick around for this, and I totally understand if you need to go.
We'll be here for a few.
Okay, Elaine, are you ready? And do you want me to share slides, or do you want to share your own slides?
I can share if I have share capacity.
Let me give it to you.
I'm
You
gonna
should have
see.
it.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. I thought I'd start off with a brief PowerPoint just talking about our program a little bit and the folks we serve and some best practices we found when developing written communications in particular for this very hard to reach population. But this will be relatively short and sweet, and then I am more than happy to answer any questions that you might have about things that are applicable to what you're creating right now. As Jamie mentioned, my name's Elaine. I'm the program manager for Project Second Chance, which is Contra Costa County Library's adult literacy program. And we have been around for quite a while, for almost 40 years. And we serve about 200 to 225 adults a year. And it is a very diverse population of adults that we serve. We serve adults who are native English speakers, were born here, came through our school systems. Some graduated from high school, some didn't, but they are not where they want to be with their reading or writing. They read at or below a 6th grade level, and often quite a bit below that. Those tend to be folks who we suspect have learning disabilities like dyslexia, but some folks come to our program and they have other life circumstances. You know, maybe they were in the foster care system or experienced homelessness as a child and didn't have much access to education. And then we serve English learners who come to our program with no or low literacy in any language. And we also serve English learners who have significant literacy in another language. So these are clearly 3 very different groups of individuals. I wanted to talk a little bit about guidelines for accessible language that I've seen out there. Most guidelines for accessible language, for example, used by healthcare providers, recommend writing at a 6th grade level. And that means, based on our population here in Contra Costa County, we know that about 80% of adults can read or write at that 6th grade level, but that means that 1 in 5 adults won't be able to comprehend your materials. And often it's higher than that within marginalized groups. So I'm going to share two contradictory pieces of information here, and I'll talk a little bit more about them. It would make sense that the lower you can bring down your reading level, the more folks will be able to understand it. But at the same time, when you go too low, you often lose meaning. If you try to bring your materials down below about a 3rd or 4th grade reading level, it gets really challenging to communicate nuance and to share the information that you need to share. So in general, when we create documentation or newsletters, anything we're sending out, flyers, we try to hit this about 3rd, 4th grade reading level to balance that accessibility for more folks in the community with the reality that you need to be able to use a certain amount of language to say what you need to say. Some general tips that I can share from our program. This is probably obvious to you, but use videos when you can. Videos offer a great opportunity to share information with folks who might not have access or might not have the literacy level to read. And then graphics and photos can help, but it's really important to make sure that they aid in meaning and they're not just decorative. Oftentimes we have this interest in making our materials really visually appealing, and if the graphic or the photo doesn't correspond with the language, for someone who has lower literacy, that can be terribly confusing. So avoid the urge just to pretty it up and ensure that your graphics and photos actually correspond with the text directly. You can use ISO universal graphical symbols. Some of you may be familiar with these already, but can somebody out there tell me what this symbol means?
Don't stop.
Yeah.
Stop, exactly. There are international safety standards that have been established. So if somebody is coming from a different country or a different language background, they will know that this symbol means stop. And I'll share a link in my next slide for where you can get a list of these ISO universal graphical symbols. But we find when we are communicating with people across language barriers, utilizing those symbols can be really an effective way to do so. Choosing a sans serif font versus a serif font. So serif font has little curly cues on the ends of the letters. It's a little bit more stylized. And you can just do a quick Google search for sans serif or serif fonts. There is some research to show that folks with reading-based learning disabilities like dyslexia do a little bit better in their reading with a sans serif font instead of a serif font. So as an accessibility best practice, we recommend a sans serif font. consider adding a glossary. There may be terminology that is specific to your organization or to the population you're trying to reach that is just going to be beyond the reading level of a lot of your folks that you are reaching out to. And you can consider adding a brief glossary, just bolding words or sharing them in a different color and corresponding that to a glossary at the back of your publication. It can be short and sweet. It doesn't have to be a full page, but just a way when you do have to use acronyms and more advanced vocabulary to help that be more accessible for folks. And then lastly, assume your communications won't be accessible for 100% of folks. Again, that sounds relatively basic, but just knowing that written communications aren't going to be able to reach everybody because of their very diverse needs and things like videos and working through community networks and whatnot will have to supplement that. Just a few tips for lowering the reading level of your text. Talk about one topic at a time. Think about if you have had a child in your life who's gone through kindergarten learning to read and they're reading those primers, right? The topics are very simplistic and one sentence talks about one topic. That's the most accessible way to share written language using those short, simple sentences and words. Keeping to not to be too much of a grammarian here, but just present tense and past simple tense when possible, instead of using passive tense, which a lot of us tend to do naturally in our communications. Passive tense for somebody who is struggling to read can be very difficult to understand. And passive tense doesn't exist the same way it does in English and all other languages. So, you know, if you can bring the subject of your sentence up to the front of the sentence and say, the boy kicked the ball instead of the ball was kicked, more people are going to be able to understand that. This is just a visual thing, but breaking up your copy. So using bullet points or short blocks instead of paragraphs is more accessible, and only using that jargon when absolutely necessary. And again, incorporating a glossary if you can. A couple of tools, I can put this as a link in the chat as well, but those ISO universal graphical symbols really do come in handy in my experience. And then Flesch Kincaid is one of many systems out there that offer text analyzers. And I like Flesch Kincaid because it's easy to understand. So you can take a piece of text that you've written and copy and paste it into one of these Flesch Kincaid grade level text analyzers, and it will tell you your text is at a 4.0. And that means the average US student in the 4th grade will be able to read it. So it's pretty straightforward. It's not the only one out there, but I think it's a pretty easy one to use. So I will incorporate these into the chat, and I'm going to turn off my presentation so I can see you all, but I'd love to answer any questions that you might have about accessible language.
This was super helpful.
Thank you. Ooh, yes. And we have a comment from Rachel that Flesch Kincaid is built into Microsoft Word, so you can test content as you go. And that's true for some newer versions of Microsoft Word. Yeah, that's really great. Oh, and Jamie said the same thing. Thank you.
I think that the folks from CEI are not on the call anymore, but I was wondering, like, is this something that like a communications team, like Contra Costa Health communications team should be well versed in this, or is it something where we might want to reach out to you or get some consultation once we kind of have our messages done?
Yeah, absolutely. We are happy to provide consultation. We're more than happy to do that. I know it can be challenging oftentimes to convey your message while bringing things down to the level that's needed. And we have quite a bit of experience with that in our program. So we're happy to do that.
Excellent.
That raises a question. Just, we had talked about like a partnerships. We talked about, I'm gonna just marinate on that for a minute. There's something brewing there. Never mind, Cover Joe's for finance. Just continue.
Oh, Jamie Schechter?
Yeah, so I'm struggling, and I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts or how to navigate things like social media that are so short, and we have such complex messages to sometimes put out there. Like, how do you straddle the balance of raising that reading level or using official terminology and still making it accessible?
Yeah, it's hard. It really is hard. I think the fewer characters you have, right? Especially something like a tweet. My gosh, for a tweet, it can just be really challenging to get the information out there that you need. Think about the populations that are utilizing these platforms as well. With a tweet, for example, it's less likely that somebody who is experiencing low literacy is going to be utilizing that mode of communication because it's so language based. Whereas we found oftentimes the folks in our program are utilizing Instagram because it's a lot more pictorial. So sometimes it's not necessarily simplifying the language, it's just using complementary ways of getting the message out there. So maybe you take the information that you have on Facebook, have on Twitter, and figure out how to choose a few keywords for a message and hashtags and stick that on Instagram. That can reach a different population.
Anybody else, either online or in the room, have any questions? Yep, Gina.
I will have access to these.
Yes, so we will be sharing all these slides and the links shared in the minutes and posting them after the meeting for sure. So we'll all have this, and we'll definitely, when our materials development working group gets back together, we're gonna dive deep into these resources for sure.
Terrific.
I really, really
Thank you all.
appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Any other questions for Elaine? Okay, I think we're gonna go back to our regularly scheduled programming. Hold on one second. And Elaine, you're welcome to stay, but I also know you've probably got a million things to do. Okay. So we did things a little backwards today, but I think it's okay because this also will give you all some context as we look a little bit more into the information we're getting back. We'll be able to see, oh yeah, will you unpin her? Thank you. And so I wanted to turn over to Juno, just a quick report back from the materials working group that has met once so far. I'll turn it over to you just to do a quick report back.
Thank you, Juno Hedrick here. Just a quick report about our March 22nd, 2023 materials working group meeting, which is our first meeting. So we reviewed the Empire list, and we also added outreach plans. We continue to kind of look to expand the Empire contacts and some key places for outreach we identified were were congregation/faith communities, unaccompanied minors, and low or no literacy. And so part of that is wonderful to hear from you today, Elaine, because it's one of the places where we kind of do some of that direct outreach. And we also reviewed the survey results we've gotten from identifiers, people with lived experience. The Empire contacts themselves should be in the meeting materials. And so anybody can take a look at them there. It's a growing list, and it's actually really wonderful to see all these names and contacts together from all these different organizations. So if you have the time, please take a look at it. Our next materials development working group meeting is going to be on April 19th, so it's just right around the corner. It's going to be from 2:30 to 4:30. I believe that's going to be all online because it is a working group, not a committee meeting. And we're planning on developing key messages, words, images. We're obviously with the information we've gotten today from Elaine and from the members from CEI. Hopefully we're going to use that to also help develop our messages. We learned a lot of very valuable information today. Thinking about who we're going to who our target audiences are, and what the most important messages we want to capture are, and having that in very plain text. I think that's something for us to keep in mind as we move forward. So I believe this meeting, the materials development working group meeting on 419 is open.
Yeah, we're open to anybody who wants to be part of it, absolutely. And we'll drop a link in, and I think the link might also be in at the end. But
Wonderful.
yes.
So
absolutely.
yeah, stop on by and see what work's being done, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and stuff and chat from community members and things like that. So thank you.
So I wanted to actually do a deeper dive with this group on the survey results. So a few more have actually come in since I built these slides, but this to me, the survey has been just a gold mine because we're getting huge amounts of information that I think is really going to guide us in what messages we want to put forward and how we want to think about them. So the first thing, and I know this is a little hard to see, but what I wanted to show you was just in terms of who we've already had contact with and heard from the amplifiers. So again, the amplifiers are essentially people who may be the ones, taking our flyers and handing them to somebody seeking services, or service providers, or people working with folks that may be at risk of penalties. So we did a really good job. A lot of people said that they work with Black or African American communities, Hispanic, Latinx, older adults, and people with disabilities. Where we could do a better job of getting some more representation for agencies that work with Native American or Indigenous populations and unaccompanied minors. So as you're just out in the world, or if you have ideas, you can either put them in the chat, either for an agency, but especially, so if you have a contact name, that's very helpful, because a lot of these we're just sending it to like info at such and such, and I think they might get lost in the shuffle. So if you know of agencies, and you can check to see in the agenda packet, it's tiny, but you can zoom in, who we've already reached out to. In terms of people with lived experience, we essentially said, do you identify as any of the following? So we had low responses. The red arrows show you where we had low responses. So we didn't have, we had very low response from immigrants, refugees, or asylees, non-English speakers. And we did put the survey out in Spanish as well, and also from transition age youth and unaccompanied minors. So this is again where, like, if you know people that have a lived experience of homelessness that fall into these populations, we want to make sure that we're getting their input and feedback on what kinds of information they want and how they want to get it. Regionally, we had really good representation. So we have basically have representation, or they work in or have contact in all regions of the county, like pretty evenly. And for people with lived experience, again, we actually had really good representation from East County and okay representation from West and Central, which is great, because I know East County often we kind of struggle with that. So
it's like opposite from what we usually get.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think this reflects a lot of the work we've been doing over the last couple of years to really build some channels and connections in East County. So one of the things we asked was, like, how do you learn about, what are the primary ways that you're actually getting information right now? Almost every, so for both people with lived experience and amplifiers, they said 211 or the website, staff at agencies, and then the big difference was people with lived experience said friends or family, and amplifiers said actually the materials were already putting out through the COC or H3, which I thought was interesting. So we asked about people's confidence, and I realized we couldn't really calculate their accuracy. You can see later, like, we have the answers that people gave, but not everybody that answered the confidence piece answered the accuracy. But we can see about 2/3 of the people with lived experience said they feel like they understand how to connect with services, and about 60% of amplifiers. And you can see the full range of how they answered, and there's some documents later. And then we asked the same question, like, okay, so what happens? Do you feel like you understand what happens after you make contact? And again, about 2/3 said yes, and about 60% said yes, I feel like I understand what happens next. This was very interesting to me. So we asked people to rank the top pieces of, and I think there was a list of probably like 15 or 20 things of, like, what are the kinds of information that you actually want to get? What's the most important material that you want right up front? And basically people with lived experience and the amplifiers said the same thing. just in slightly different orders, right? Which is great. That makes our job so much easier. If they had wildly different things, then we'd really be trying to figure out how do we front load like 8 pieces of information instead of 4, which are all pretty connected. So essentially, how to get connected to services, particularly basic needs services, emergency and rental and utilities assistance, and shelter. So,
Question.
yeah,
Going back to what CEI was saying earlier about what he said to bring back, and
Really?
exactly what he said was, hold on,
Yep.
here, because I feel like this is connected. Who's the audience?
Yep.
And you bring back 1 to 5 important messages, 25 words or less.
Yep.
With those 4 things.
Yep.
I feel like us as a committee, that's exactly what we should bring back to the next meeting.
Yep.
Like, we should come up with our own 1 to 5, 25 words or less for
Yep.
each one of those bullet points for each
Yep.
of those audiences.
that's why I love this, because this tells us what our work is pretty clearly. Yep, we don't have to make it up. It tells us right there. Yes, and Rachel says, I think these categories will also render well into videos, graphics, and accessible language, which is also great. Agreed. I've already started sort of crafting between this and some of the other categories, which things might lend themselves especially well to video versus a more complicated document. So this is like the laundry list of all the topics in the survey. And so I won't go through these because you can see them later, but these are all the things that people actually still do want information about. We might just not put them on like a flyer. It might be a video or a frequently asked questions. Yeah.
FAQs, when I've done advertising campaigns in the past where you're doing that, you get 1 per video, 1 per thing, and you just
Yep.
rotate them through on a daily basis.
Yes,
And so you do like 20 of these, and then you continually rotate them in random orders.
that's
So,
great.
and that'll get that out there.
That's great. And then there's some, this list is like what we told them, what we already knew were some very commonly asked things. And then we said, well, is there anything else that you feel like you want to know about? And so some of the other things just sort of, we lump them into categories. So anything about like requirements or process details, and often that's related to like the specific program. Connections to other types of services. So again, no surprise, but like healthcare, how to get IDs, transportation. Specifically services for youth or transition age youth, specific contact information for providers, and anything like some advocacy and policy resources. So there's some broader questions of like, around police or around how cities can respond. So it was interesting to see what else came out. So then the tools, this was another thing that was super interesting to me because they had wildly different answers in some regards. So people with lived experience, number 1 and 2 were transit ads and billboards. And in having our initial conversation with the CEI team, they were like, well, that's interesting because that's the most expensive way to go. But there are ways that we can figure out, how to potentially do those. Posters for display and service sites, which was, in that top 3 for the amplifiers. Social media, which great, we just heard about, and we can definitely do that. And then videos or flyers, so those were tied. Amplifier said flyers, posters for display and service sites, and that tracks with kind of how they're sharing information. Content for agency newsletters and emails, so I thought that was really interesting. And that's something, again, when we get our key messages, we can have basically this little toolkit of like, here are the messages and here are the actions. And you can put this stuff in your toolkit, in your newsletters or emails. Business size cards, again, that's pretty easy. Again, once we get our messages and once we get our look, like we can just have this whole catalog of tools. And then the QR code. So that's like, if somebody's in their office, they can like scan. And so we want to make sure that we have a website landing page that links to that QR code. But again, once we figure out our messaging and the images, the rest of this should be fairly easy. Yeah.
So I'm really liking this, especially with the context that we heard today from the CI team.
Yeah.
Because, I'm realizing that, like, for example, we could link in a QR code to our social media.
Absolutely.
And then it goes into buckets there, or even.
On the poster.
Yeah, exactly. Or, maybe the flyer works as a Instagram post or like as a Twitter image post or something.
Yes.
And then on top of that, you have the QR code. On top of that, it's the content where you see newsletters. So like, yeah, so I can totally see where we can start stacking those up, hitting most of our target audiences.
Wait,
One thing to keep in mind with QR codes is it's built into Apple phones, but not into low-end Android phones.
oh, that's good to know.
So you have to actually install an extra application. So for many people that have the free phones that they get, you can't use QR codes.
Great,
It's
good.
not
And,
always true, but something to keep in mind. That's your target.
well, and I think that actually tracks about why the kick had that came up for amplifiers, who
Yeah.
may be folks that have more resources and are working in professional settings versus people with lived experience.
Mhm.
Yes, Joe.
And this kind of goes a little bit into the weeds. The transit ads and the billboards with the money situation,
Mhm.
and I was kind of going off this earlier with partnerships. Now, transit, like the transit BART,
Mhm,
you know, East Bay Transit, whatever transit you want to pick,
mhm.
I would see if they have a program or something that they're doing to prevent homelessness or to
Mhm.
help with homelessness,
Mhm.
or like if there's a connection there.
Mhm.
And I wasn't sure if that's being done, if that's something that, because it's not a communications thing, that's more of an outreach thing, so I wasn't sure what that is.
Yeah, and that's something in our initial conversation with CEI, they basically said they're gonna charge for any sort of ad campaign, but they might have some reduced rate. But also, you're right, I think a lot of transit agencies are struggling with homelessness, particularly at their like stations or depots or whatever, so there may be like a sales pitch and or there might be some grant opportunities related to these transit agencies to do some sort of campaign about like, here's where people actually can go and get help. So, yeah, and that's something we'll lean on CEI too, because this is really what they do, like, they buy these ad spaces and they have relationships and all that stuff. Wait.
What I've seen with things like that is there are ad campaign purchases by the advertisers on these areas, and there's overlap where there's no advertising, and you buy up at a discount price,
Yep.
low space. So you get kind of limited time and all of that, but you get something out.
Yeah.
So that might be the sweet spot where we could do that. Yeah.
Cool. Is the left side the responses from the survey? Oh, sorry. So left side is people with lived experience and right side is amplifiers. And again, left side, people with lived experience are people with lived experience of homelessness. We did a survey, 2 different surveys. And amplifiers are essentially people that are working with folks that may have lived experience. Hopefully that helps clarify. So there was a ton of qualitative feedback, right? So we did some things where we're like, we can see what percentage said yes or no. We did some analysis of the qualitative feedback and pulled out sort of what are the words and tone that people with lived experience wanted in some of these materials, and what are the things that it really said, we do not want to see this. So what people want is like person first language, right? So not the homeless, people experiencing homelessness. So like an experience happening to people, hope, help, respect, and a positive tone. People do not like the word crisis or don't respond to that. No false promises, which seems pretty reasonable. And don't use a lot of jargon and don't use too many words. Keep it simple, tell me what I need. And don't make me look pitiful. You're gonna see, like that's, in terms of images wanted, people that are happy and hopeful and that look like them. And they're smiling. A bunch of people said smiling. We don't want to see people shown in a negative light, and we don't want to see people that are obviously in need on the street or looking pitiful. And then in terms of colors, and again, we'll talk to CEI about this a little bit more, but you know, kind of universally, people said like bright and vibrant and happy. Red is a funny color when you get into, you know, sometimes it's like alarming.
Yes.
But this was a really interesting idea of like looking at the color wheel and what are the colors associated with like hope and safety. So I feel like we can dig into that. So this is where we can work with CEI some too on what kind of colors we might want to look at. Okay, that was really fast, but that was like a blitz. The other thing I'll say is I think we have today, I think we have 53 people with lived experience that have answered and like 77 or 78 amplifiers, which is great. I think there's not all of that's included in this, but pretty close. So I just wanted to like pause for a minute on the survey data and see if people have questions. We're going to talk more about the amplifiers in a minute, but yeah, Joe.
Will we be sending out the surveys again, or was it just that one-time thing? I know that they're still open.
Yep.
But will we be doing it again?
That's a great question. So Joe, basically, like, are we continuing to push out the surveys? And I am actually continuing to push out the surveys. And I've noticed a couple of the county supervisors put it in their newsletters, which made me really happy. I think
Nice.
2 or 3 of them did, which is great. So you have connections with amplifiers or other networks. Like, I think the more information we get, because we're not just getting information, but we're getting connections with people who are there at the end. We ask them, like, do you want to be involved in this work? Do you want to, because what we're going to do is like draft some stuff, then we need to field test it. So we've asked people, do you basically want to be a tester? Can we come back to you and ask for your input on this work? And tell us if we're getting it right or not. So I say keep spreading the word about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, this might be like a separate conversation, because I remember we did in person when we did the flyer, or when we did the survey, we were, a friend of mine, we were actually there doing it in person. I was on my phone and answering the questions for them. And I'm wondering if we should do that again, if we should plan like a different location, you know, because I just went out there as myself, like, if we can visit the shelters and do the survey at the shelters, you know, or anybody who's already in our HMIS system, maybe go visit their actual locations and sit there. And but that's, you know, maybe that's a couple of years down the road. I'm just saying, I can see myself doing that type of thing.
Well, you asked a good question. So like, you know, H3, we have a number of service providers that run shelters or have a community center, and it could be something where we, you know, ask like, hey, this week, can you guys get as many answers as you can? We haven't done a big push like that's targeted that way. So we could do that. I mean, I know it's extra work, but we could send you printouts. We could, you know, we could figure something out around that.
I really like that. What I really, so a little bit more segmentation, those are people that are actually in it. If you're at Trinity Center, you're in HMS or something like that. I'd rather do it in Canton now.
Yeah,
You know,
right, exactly.
right, because those are people that are more than likely to be beyond the margin of already receiving services or information. Yeah.
Even at the food distribution centers, we get, have somebody sit there and say, hey, you want to take a survey?
Well, that's
Yeah.
actually a
Would you like to
perfect
take a
segue, because,
Oh, there it is.
thank you for that, because in the amplifier list, and so, okay, full disclosure, I know for the people that have a printout of the packet, the amplifier list ended up super tiny, but you can scan on it, and so the way we sorted this was, if there's an X on the left-hand side, we have a completed survey from that amplifier, either that person or that agency. I put the ones at the top where we don't have any response yet, and I think, or we have decided that we really should hear from them. So you'll see there's a bunch of transit agencies, but also the food bank. So this is a time where if you look at this list and you have, in fact, let me, hold on, let me stop sharing for a minute. And I'm gonna pull up the amplifier list, and we're just gonna look real quickly. So this is a good time to think about all of your connections. And if you have a warm connection at any of these agencies, now is the time to like check in with them, nudge them. Okay, let me make this big. Okay, so what you can see on the left, these top, and so you see we sent them to some of the board members for BART, but also like my contact, and I don't know if they're still active, that was like their homeless liaison. Food Bank and NAMI, I think are all like, we definitely want to make sure we hear from them, because we know that they have a lot of contact with the folks that we're working with.
That's great.
Yeah. So if there are other, you know, and for a lot of these, like I just have one contact, and it might not be the right one, or they're too busy. So if you have other contacts, by all means. And then when we get past the gray, and I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but you'll see then alphabetically who we have. Either if there's an email address, we send it to them. If we don't have an email address, then that means that we need a contact. So if you have a contact for any of these people, you can just either put it in the chat, send it an email. But there's a lot of like faith congregations, for example, that we know maybe have like a feeding program. So I won't spend a lot of time, but you can just see like in terms of the amplifier list. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is only partial information, right? The content information from the amplifiers list.
Yes.
It's actually like phone numbers and like location of like
Yeah.
regional address and all
Yep.
that things.
Yeah, it was just too much time.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I'm wondering with a few of these with location wise, like, would I be able to go into one, like, if I figure out like when they're doing the food during that certain church, and if I show up and say, hey, we're doing this. Is that okay to do, or should we, I mean, there would be a problem with it,
No,
right?
I think if you have the bandwidth for that, and I think, you know, there's two, so like in that example, like there's people with lived experience that you might wanna say like, hey, are you open to taking a survey? But we also really wanna check in with the staff because they have a perspective too that we want to have.
Yeah, I would suggest checking in, so I know a lot of churches that do food pantries, and many of them are a mixture of local community and unhoused. And have a lot more, that, not necessarily who we're trying to reach here. And so I think coordinating with them first, rather than showing up would be important.
Yeah.
Could be alienating who they're serving.
And I'll also note that just, you know, coordinating with the staff is important too. I know if I were running something and someone came up saying, hey, I got a survey,
exactly.
would I, you know?
Yes.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So and the reason why I asked is because I did ask somebody who I go and pick up food from at the church, I asked them how they would receive a survey, and they said, yeah, absolutely, come bring it to us. So I have plans to go see them on Sunday after church to hang out with them, to then have a conversation about what that would look like. And I'm wondering if that process could be just said to any community, any, like, I don't know. So yeah, I'm just brainstorming that. But cool.
And there are two economies of scale. One is either those food pantries are very small, or like ours, they're very large. You know, it's kind of one or the other. They both present different challenges.
Okay, so let me share my screen again. We already heard from them. Oh, Jamie. Well, actually, let me just pause for a minute.
There's a couple comments in the chat.
Oh, okay.
So Rachel asked a question about whether, which supervisors may have shared the link, and Saad and Carl.
Apologies. Sorry. Okay, I cannot remember which.
We did.
Okay, yes.
Supervisor Anderson's office did.
Yep. And I actually think Burgess did too, so I can double check. I don't think Glover, there's usually not a lot of stuff in newsletters from that office, but yeah. And then, what was the other question?
And then a recommendation of doing a focus group in coordination with community-based organizations serving populations we might need help reaching, like the Young Women's Freedom Center or Safe Return, where we can go through the survey in person. The folks are already working with those. That's all we haven't had the best luck of or efforts to reach.
Oh, no, please, go ahead.
I was hoping to change this up, so.
Oh, okay, I just, one small bit on here. The 80-20 rule, I think we've done about 80, what I mean is, I don't want us to get stuck collecting information
Totally.
from populations, you know.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, I feel like I feel really confident about the amount of information we have to move forward, making some, like, starting. And then we can, for me, like, the point of the surveys at this point going forward is almost more like to gather people that are interested in providing feedback with our drafts. So I agree. I don't know that we're spending a ton of energy getting a bunch more surveys, because honestly, we have way better response than I anticipated. Surveys are not always easy to get responses from.
Survey fatigue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You might, oh, sorry, you're changing the topic though, right? Yes. Okay. It might be worthwhile to keep us in like this passive survey collection phase, and maybe in a year, we do a bigger push to see how things change.
Yes. Exactly.
I like that idea a lot. That's actually kind of what I was gonna talk about, like, because I like the idea of like having the same or similar survey during that push, but closing the results of the old survey, so we kind of can see how those results differ when we do make that push. And so, like, you know, the idea of like taking the survey to, for example, for what I would imagine would be like, for me, would be like a Thai house, so like Riverside or Mona, and you know, trying to talk with the youth and like see if they can get responses that way. But that would be like, those results might get clouded up by our like general pool of results from like everything else, whereas like it might be beneficial from like a data standpoint to know that that's coming from our more targeted or more pushing style of going for it. So yeah, I like that idea. I like it. I like maybe in like a year or so, kind of closing out the old results and like same survey probably even, but then like going forward with the survey again, that push. And like, yeah, like Joe said, she'd be more than willing to, like, you know, and his plans to go to like a different an organization or church and like talk about the survey. I do the same thing for Kelly House or something or anything like that. I know it's especially for youth, it's like, it's one thing to have like a staff member there, you know, being like, you know, y'all should take a look at the survey, but it's another thing to have somebody who's like been in the shelter or like has lived experience, you know, there can kind of talk about it. So
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is a commitment from everybody to keep on the committee for one more year.
As long as you keep doubling up these meetings, so we only have to come to Concord once.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
wonderful.
So that's why we might be virtual again.
Another suggestion would be to coincide more the survey results with Homeless Awareness Month and in the lead up on that, because of that publicity will already get people talking about it. This is related to that.
Yes, and my hope, my fervent hope is that by the time we get to Homeless Awareness Month, we will have things to launch, and that can be a big part of our flash
Yeah.
for Homeless Awareness Month, because that's November. We're making good progress, so. I'm
Why
hopeful.
was I already thinking about what our next topic was gonna be for homeless awareness month? I'm like, wait, we're not, it's
Oh,
not
I
even
just-
May, and I'm already thinking about, never mind.
I've already started planning for that. Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, so Jamie is going to, let me get this back up. We have our definitions. Okay, and I can do it.
Okay, go back up real quick. So before we jump into the slides, just to recap, last month when we met, we wanted to get a little bit of conversation for working definitions related to equity that this group can have. So that way we're all speaking the same language. And when we talk about race or equity or race equity lens, we know what that definition means for this group and for the Council on Homelessness. So what we've done in these slides is we pulled together the definitions that were given to us by C4 Innovation, the consultants who helped us with our racial equity evaluation that was presented back in January 22 to the Council on Homelessness and led to kind of the formation of this group. So we pulled them together, and a lot of the conversation we had last month was, are these good enough to be working definitions? Of course, we can refine and build on and make better over time, but are they a good starting point? Are they good enough to meet the needs so that we can have a common language? And then as time goes on, we can develop them and tailor them to our needs. But before we jump into the slides, I'm going to go over the terms that we'll be discussing because there's only one or two per slide. And I know people are concerned we missed some things. So some terms we'll be discussing are race and racism. We've dug into these a lot last month, so we'll probably just gloss over in case anybody's had some more thoughts since then. But for the most part, folks seemed on board. And Alex, I remember you gave us some really great language from NAEH to insert in there. We recycled the slides, so you won't see that reflected, but I do remember that you had some great input on that. We'll also be talking about race equity and a race equity lens, as well as white privilege, racial bias, and microaggressions, and then a little bit about understanding the different levels of racism, individual, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. So with that, let's jump on in. So like I said, these two we dug into a lot last month, and and so I think for the most part, folks felt good with where these started and wanted to kind of move forward into new definitions with the additions from the NAEH kind of text that Alex had mentioned and that I'm not going to recount well right now. Alex, I don't know if you are comfortable jumping in.
Just about the racial equity piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to really define it in terms of outcomes, really to focus on the outcome piece.
Great.
Which I think is covered here, just differently.
Yep. But, and for folks who are listening, and I realize I've been saying NAEH, and that is the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They work at a national level, as the name implies, and have a lot of really great resources and tools. Okay. So any thoughts before moving on to the next set of terms? Great. So here, two terms, again, working definitions for our group to work off of. Race equity, the condition where one's racial identity does not predict their social health or economic outcomes. And a race equity lens is a way of viewing the world in an integrated and holistic manner, taking into account past and present racial injustices and seeking to address them through more equitable practices and structures. So when we talk about race equity, that's like kind of the goal that we're trying to meet here in this group, is that no matter what your racial identity is, if you're having the same access and opportunities to the housing resources in our community as anyone else. And the lens is us applying these questions about what are the ways in which race might be integrated into our practices as we're doing the work.
Are we doing comments?
Yeah, open comments. Yeah, Leslie, go ahead.
I'm not necessarily suggesting we need to change any of this, but I know for me, outcomes always connotes end results. And it's been my experience in my larger family context that racial equity is also about your day-to-day experience, not the end outcome, but your day-to-day experience, how you experience life and what it makes a difference if it's me or if it's my spouse who's African American. They're different experiences until they aren't, and then we'll be there.
Yep, I like that.
But I'm not advocating changing anything.
So I think that's a good thought to keep in our greenhouse or parking lot or whatever. So when we're coming back to these terms and we're finding it, like, are there edits and suggestions we can to incorporate the experience of people that we're working with and that we have ourselves? I like that a lot. Other thoughts on the definitions in front of us for race equity and race equity lens? Okay, I'll keep it moving. Oh, next on the wrong computer. Okay. Next, the white privilege. So white privilege is unearned assets, immunities, permissions, advantages, benefits, and choices available to people based on their belonging to a dominant group, in this case, white people. And I also remember conversation about capitalizing that, so we will be sure to not capitalize when we put it forward for a final kind of definition set. Those who experience such privilege are often unaware of it.
I want to address something on this.
Sure.
That last sentence makes me want to then put an additional sentence in that are kind of important. That those who are unaware of it, it is very difficult and very traumatizing for those who are unaware of it to actually become aware of it. There is, white fragility is a real thing. And to bring that to, I don't know how delicate to be around that, if it needs to be something to be delicate, but I think that it needs to be addressed in a way that, it's, I don't know if that needs to be an additional sentence or just that it could be difficult for some folks. Depending on the conversations I've had that just ended in tears and anger, like, so.
Thank you for that. What I think, hearing the name of the term white fragility, it seems to me like that would be just a good additional definition to have.
Yes, well, there it is. White fragility is a real thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we can come back with that as well to add to the list. Any other thoughts on white privilege as a concept or as this definition sits in front of us? All right, looks like those espresso beans did the opposite of the goal this time. I just kidding.
Oh, it kept me
I'm
awake.
just kidding.
Okay,
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll just let you try.
So next up, we're looking at racial bias, which is implicit and explicit bias that influence the attitudes and behaviors when interacting with people or situations. And then microaggressions, which are brief, everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group membership. And specifically with these two, I think they get a little bit more higher level in terms of the word used, the vocabulary. Are there thoughts on how folks are reacting to it? Does this feel accessible language, especially to the committee and to the folks in the room?
Depends. For me, like, depends on who we're, sorry, I have a cough, espresso bean in my mouth. Depends on who we're like, I guess having a reminder on who we want to target, I guess, would be good, because in some cases, especially considering what we heard today from Elaine, like, the message gets across to me, however, like, you know, vocabulary like denigrating could be probably reworded as something that's like a bit lower level. Yeah, so I guess like
That's a good answer. And I think the primary audience for these definitions are council members and the committee specifically as well. Like these will stand as, this is how the Council on Homelessness talks about racial bias or microaggressions for now.
okay. In that case, I feel like the language kind of conveys what we're trying to talk about, but it seems like they're not.
Leslie then Wayne, because I saw Leslie's face marinating.
No,
on
that's okay. So with respect to racial bias, I would love it if it could somehow incorporate implicit and explicit bias on either an individual, small group, or systemic level. If we could somehow, without making it any wordier and more complicated, but it can operate on all of those levels,
Yeah.
independently and at the same time.
That's kind of, it's kind of all wrapped into the word situations there, but I think it is worth individually pointing out. It's like, so yeah, it extends out from like small group to big group to, you know, you could stretch it all the way out to societal like level. So it's like, yeah.
I like the way you frame that, Leslie. It can, racial bias can operate on multiple levels, from individual to institutional, you know, the big ways. Okay.
Just clarifying, these are terms that we're using for definitions. These are context and framing terms internally.
Yes.
We're not looking necessarily to educate or these terms. Some of the, yeah.
Yeah, there are starting points for that. We are having common language because as we're getting into, you know, more and more material development and are we targeting equity? We want to make sure we're all having the same understanding of what equity is for this context. Great question. Okay.
Oh, I had one more thing.
Okay, go for it.
For microaggressions, there's just something about the group membership that like doesn't hit me particularly well, and I don't maybe have a suggestion for how to change it. However, one thing that I kind of have a feeling about is that it's not only like the group membership, it's also like the lack of group membership. So it's like being in or out of the end group. And so I think that maybe kind of touching on that might capture it a bit more.
Yep. Sorry, this is what happens when I take notes and trying to still think at the same time.
You're doing great.
Okay, sorry for all the dead air for everybody on Zoom. Thank you, Jonah. That I think is really insightful, and I think we can look to, you know, tweak some language and more kind of directly insert language about people in power and power structures. And I think that's kind of what group membership is trying to speak to. So I'll marinate on that, and we'll come back with some proposed language tweaks. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about understanding the levels of racism, just so that, again, we have that common understanding of at the very basic 101 level when we're talking about things in this group and as the council. So there's individual and systemic and some overlapping in that interpersonal, right? At an individual level, when we talk about racism is a person's beliefs and actions that serve to perpetuate oppression. And so that can be conscious or unconscious, and it can be externalized or internalized. So that can be, your own internal beliefs about yourself because of your group membership or affiliations or participation in marginalized communities. But it can also be, pointing at others and saying, oh, I've got beliefs about them. That's the individual level of racism. An interpersonal level of racism speaks to the interaction between people, both within and across difference. So that's, going into another community or interacting with people in this room. That's interpersonal relationships and how racism shows up in those conversations and interactions. On the more systemic side, the more fully systemic side, we talk about institutional and structural racism. So institutional talks about policies and practices at the organization or sector level that perpetuate oppression. So this is, if you are in your workplace and they've got rules that target particular demographics, that's an institutionalized policy or practice that perpetuates oppression against that marginalized community. And then structurally, this is how those policies and practices interact and accumulate across institutions and across history. So maybe, at your workplace, there's that policy and practice, and it lines up with a local community law or ordinance, and then that lines up with the state level law or ordinance, and then that lines up with the federal. So all together, those institutions have accumulated policies and practice that disproportionately affect Black, Indigenous people of color and other people from marginalized communities. So when you hear these terms, this is again the 101. I'm sure there are people who have PhDs in talking about these things, but this is, I think, the level that might best serve us to share that common foundation of understanding. Any questions, concerns, thoughts, or feedback about these definitions or concepts?
Can I ask large structural question? I'm looking at this interpersonal, the interactions between people, right? And I'm wondering how to get that into the material that we'll create. Like, I want to get that kind of equitable thought process as we begin creating that material. So I want to throw that out there because that's where I'm marrying at. Because we have to have a little bit of that individual as well as a little bit of structural, systematic thing, but we have to meet that in the middle to make it understandable.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tools out there that can help us reach that goal or move towards that goal. Of like, there are checklists, for example, of questions you're asking around decisions. Who does it benefit? Who does it not? What assumptions might be built into these things? Does that, impact different groups differently? So there are ways to kind of try and build in those interaction level kind of ideas into tools and materials, scripts we develop, videos we might produce, to make it, targeted and reaching the communities we want to reach without alienating anyone. Exactly. We don't want to have to walk back a tweet any day. Next slide. Great. So this is, again, just another slide to more visualize the levels of racism that we received from our C4 Innovations partner and give a little bit more about systemic racism. I like the circle within a circle to represent kind of the movement from individual to interpersonal, all the way to institutional and systemic. It, to me, helps really put the visual to how things accumulate and build on each other. But I'll read the definition because I know it can be small font over here. But systemic racism, in another way of looking at it, is infrastructure of ruling, ordinances, or statutes promulgated or created and distributed by a sovereign government or authoritative entity, whereas such ordinances and statutes entitled one ethnic group in a society certain rights and privileges while denying others in that group in that same society rights and privileges because of long established prejudices, religious prejudices, cultural prejudices, fears, myths, and xenophobia held by that entitled group or that group in power.
Question, could you back up one slide?
I can
I'm trying to articulate this, so it has to do with institutional systemic.
Mhm.
By definition, we are an institution. We are, even though we are attempting to work with, how do we guard against this ourselves? You know, because just by the nature of the work that we are doing as H3, as the Council on Homelessness, this is the definition of that.
Yeah.
So, and I've never seen that articulated well by anybody. So, this is where I'm most interested in, is how do I, because how do I check myself? How do we check ourselves before we leave?
I think you'd have a billion-dollar kind of business idea if you knew the easy answer to that. But I think the things that we're trying are the things that are going to help us move towards that. So things like monitoring our data at a demographic disaggregated way has given us a look into how we're interacting with people coming to receive services. Things like asking these questions of who benefits, who does not. Things like receiving training from external experts on these topics.
Even having our equity assessment from an outside agency come in and do an equity assessment, knowing that like we probably can't see the places where we're struggling. And then we went through a whole process to decide, okay, what do we do with that? And that's kind of where we landed with the work plan now. But I hear you also on the same granular level, day to day. How are we?
We're talking about materials and time, and we are coming from a group that comes from similar places. All of us sitting in this room right now, you know. But just because I have implicit bias, and I do, doesn't mean I can always overcome it. And I'm just specifically looking for how can we, you know, be mindful of that.
Yep, and I think it's a process of improvement. All right, we're gonna mess up, we're gonna stumble, and centering the voice of the people with experience, making sure that we are putting decision-making power into the communities that are most impacted, making sure that we are doing our due diligence on monitoring and evaluating ourselves and sharing resources so that at that individual level, you're asking these questions in your day-to-day and doing that sort of multi-tiered strategy. And I saw Leslie have her hand up, then Joe.
I was just gonna say, this is why I do this business. This is why I do what I do, because it's that people don't trust the system. The reason why people don't trust the system is because of this exact thing. Like taking that individual and bringing all of the biases that we hold as an individual and then bringing it to a larger system, that you gotta check yourself at the door. Check yourself at the door. We can come have these conversations, but we all have to check ourselves at the door because we're not doing this for us. So that's kind of why I'm here doing this, because we're not, since the system doesn't work for us, we have to be part of the system for the system to work. So
And I would just add, you're getting right to the heart of it. For me, for us, a very wise person, Audre Lorde, said the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So how do I live within that structure and still hope for a world that's different? So I bring hope to it, and I bring that humility. Like I have to be open to hearing the hard messages and changing because of it, and yet still part of the system to do it all. So hope and humility, those are the keys for me.
Because I hear you, and then you say check yourself at the door, but I don't know how necessarily. You know.
hope and humility.
I mean, I think I want to add too, Wayne, like when I think about the work we've been doing in this committee so far this year, we created a survey and have been very explicitly not only going out and trying to get input from people with lived experience or amplifiers, but also saying like, what communities do you represent, and making sure that we have representation. So it's not like the 5 or 6 of us in a room being like, well, we know what people need and we know what it should look like. And we know, like, to me, part of the way that you build equity in is to get more information, use it, but also bring people to the table. So having these, you know, building in compensation policies for people with lived experience, compensating the folks that we're gonna ask to be part of the survey, or, you know, like the review of all of that, to me is like moving in the direction of equity through action.
Gotcha. I hear you.
And that to me, like at the system level, what we're doing.
Mhm.
And then like how we conduct ourselves in these meetings, or like I feel, because there are so many levels where this stuff operates, but for me, that's where I see the like institutional or even the like system piece is that stuff that we're intentionally building in.
It's because by participating in the system changes us. I'm not the same man that received the seat a year ago. So just want to be mindful of that. So at least I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Erin left a great comment in the chat. There are several organizations and groups that commonly workshop on identifying personal biases. So that's really great. We're also going to be having a training, a provider training, June, second Thursday of June. Nope. Second Monday. Second Monday of June. Sorry. On racial equity, DEI topic. So all the COC providers who are on our mailing list will get notice of that. If you are COC funded, it's highly recommended you attend this required training, but it's open to everybody. Open to everybody.
Highly recommend.
Okay. So coming back to the systemic racism slide, just any questions, thoughts? The language here feels very academic to me, but it's really connected to the previous slide and adding a little bit more texture to it.
I just think it's interesting, it talks about systemic racism, but then the word used is one ethnic group in
Yeah.
the society. So I'm like,
Yeah.
did I miss something there?
Right.
Yeah, I don't
But
know.
just
where
pointing it out.
this one feels awkward.
Yeah. I think it's in the spirit of the other one, but it's not quite on the same mark as the other one. Yeah, this one I think we wouldn't, bust out at every meeting necessarily,
Right.
but it could be just have more context in our back pocket. Okay, great. So we'll do some cleanup on some of those definitions and add in a white fragility one to bring back to this group, and then eventually bring to the Council on Homelessness just to say, hey, these are the working definitions for coming up. Let's set ourselves a timeline of when do we revisit this? When do we add and refine after doing all this work that we're doing in this group?
And may I suggest that addressing this also be part of the next orientation? Of
Yeah,
where
that's
we're
exactly what I was
gonna
thinking.
recruit
That's
people
orientation.
in the council, so it's.
I love that. That's exactly my thought.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we are super close to the end. I just wanted to flag, okay, first of all, A+, everybody, we are
I think you guys as a room
Yeah.
froze.
oh, our room froze.
Oh no, can you not hear
No,
us?
I can hear you now.
Okay,
great.
no, for some reason our connection is unstable in a county building.
Of course, well, look at that, it's time to go.
Goodness, right?
So,
Universal.
time to go.
That happened the first
Hey,
time,
that's
we
a
lost
wrap.
power.
Right? So, Materials Development Working Group, everyone's invited. The next Equity Committee meeting will be on May 9th. And hopefully we will have some things to bring back from both the definitions, but also the Materials Development Group might actually have some things for us to kind of workshop and tighten up. That is all she wrote. Are there questions, comments?
I guess I have a comment.
Yeah.
I think it's, I think the discussions we sort of had towards the end about kind of checking our own biases are like really key. It's something that we should all hold on to those discussions, but I think it is really, well, I have so many thoughts rolling in my head, because like I heard what Wayne said about, how the system changes us, and it's like, it really does. You may not even realize it, but it definitely does change. It has changed me a lot. And so I think that's something I'd love to bring, even just that little tidbit of discussion we had at the end to like something to share with the rest of the council at some point, just because it is just a good reminder, you know, and also what Leslie said, you know, as well. It's yeah. So that's my little haphazard comment. That's it. But yeah.
I have all my heart emojis. And I wanna say that I think that's a really good idea because as lived experience advisors, right? Like we are currently living the experience of being part of the system after being out in the streets. Like that's huge. That, I mean, that changes somebody for sure. And I think as lived experience advisors, we should bring that voice saying, hey, you know, the system has changed us in this way. Yeah, I mean, committee meetings are nice. I'm in committee meetings all the time.
So I'm not in the context of lived experience advisor, however, I have lived experience and the three of us are in so many meetings together. And I do a lot of, well, it's our term, so evangelism around lived experience and not universally, but very strongly people are against participating, not because they are against the system, but because they don't want to wear their lived experience as a badge of their life now. They want to move on, you know, and you know, like I know a lot of men and women that don't want to give the time that it takes because they want to spend that time, you know, building away from it.
Yeah.
You know, and I certainly understand that I can relate to that. So, but it has me thinking about how my experience is impacted by being. So I don't know.
All right, so it looks like we'll have a report out at the May council meeting. then.
That's just volunteer myself.
I know that. So who from the group council wants to be part of the report out?
You recorded it, right?
Joe
Somebody's
Brenner.
back.
No, but we can, there's also people online that are members of the committee, and we can support to,
I don't mind doing a report out.
Joe said, okay,
I can do a report out.
for the record, Joe is interested in the report out, okay, so, great.
Ready to go.
I think our work here is done. Thank you all. We will hopefully see you at the materials development group and or the next meeting. Oh, yeah, we close it first.
I see this a lot.
Bye, thank you, bye, everybody.
Bye, Alex.